disclosure, this work was supported, and that means funded by CardiArc Incorporated, and Dr. Juni, one of the authors, is employed and part owner of the CardiArc and the very inventive inventor of this device. Our objective was to perform initial testing on this novel dedicated cardiac spec system. We're measuring the standard parameters such as spatial resolution, energy resolution, uniformity, and sensitivity. But the system's unique geometry requires modification of standard testing procedures, such as we're measuring tomographic uniformity, not planar uniformity. Conventional spec systems fully utilize only a small portion of the detector at any given time when imaging the heart, shown by this diagram. But there's several new dedicated spec systems that have one thing in common, and that is that they surround the patient's heart with detectors and simultaneously image from different directions. That's the end of the singularity, though. They're very different detector designs. The benefits from all of these, though, is to reduce the radiation dose, shorten scan times, which of course are interrelated, as are better patient comfort and less motion. One benefit that they have in common is since they surround the heart, they raise the possibility of dynamic spec, which is difficult to do with standard spec cameras. The system designed for this unit is a stationary detector with moving collimation. If you look at the diagrams to the right, this is what is housed inside this area of the scanner with the patient sitting in the chair, as you see here. If you take any given point on the crystal, trace a ray path through a slit in this scanning lead aperture that has 6 vertical slits, then you form one ray path. This arc scans back and forth, and as it does, this line will traverse the full field of view of the detector. Behind that, you have horizontal lead slats that form the collimation between transaxial planes. So it's a hybrid where you have pinhole imaging within the transaxial plane, but transaxial planes are separated by parallel hole collimation. You perform acquisitions by the arc scanning back and forth in 10 seconds. So every 10 seconds, you've completely sampled the field of view 5 times. There's 6 holes, but only 5 of them are exposing crystal at any given time. Combining resolution is the wrong word, but high sampling and large number of samples across this arc, and fine angular sampling, which also translates to temporal sampling. As the arc moves, you end up with about 100 times or more than 100 times more lines of response than a conventional spec camera with parallel hole collimation. For our methods of measuring tomographic uniformity and sensitivity, we wanted a distributed source, for which we used a 5 ml syringe with 3 ml magnesium solution. For things where we wanted a more finite source, we used capillary tube. And for all the measurements, we did them tomographically as spec acquisitions and used a fixture that allowed us to precisely move these 2 sources around in the field of view and to reproduce those positions if we needed to. For tomographic uniformity, we used 1 millicurie of technetium. We placed it in the syringe and imaged it at 12 positions within a wide area centered on the typical location of the patient's heart within the scanner. You can see different positions here, and over here, very small, you can see dots that represent individual transaxial slices. The reason I wanted to show that is that we look at the results on the next slide. I built a composite of those 12 acquisitions, and then we calculated counts per minute per microcurie for each of the positions, and in the summary over here at right, the average counts per minute for microcurie is 198 for the first 9 positions. Adding the back 3, which are right at the edge of the back of the field of view, raises the standard deviation between counts received by from 1.4 to 2.2%. And I'm old in the U.S., and here's the SIU. For energy resolution, We analyzed raw data from list mode acquisitions for the capillary tube and the syringe. We were not able to measure any difference in energy resolution over the field of view of the camera. At right, you can see the spectrum from one of the sites for the capillary tube. Here with technetium, this is 140 keV. For a syringe with a little added Compton scatter down below because of the scatter within the syringe. And just for comparison, in a situation closer to a patient image, here you see the spectrum with the JSAC anthropomorphic phantom. One thing that I would like to note here is you do see a little bit of a lead X-ray peak, but in my experience that's a little bit lower than I would see with parallel hole collimation. And that surprised me because when I first looked at this camera design with the large horizontal lead slats, I expected there to be a fairly large lead X-ray peak. For resolution, we did 14 individual measurements of the capillary tube with about a 0.5 millicurie of technetium. Filtered back projection reconstruction, which in this system does include some system modeling, but no smoothing filter was applied. Over here you can see the locations for those 14 individual measurements and a rough estimate of where that would translate to the heart in a patient acquisition. Our results are shown in this graph of spec full width half maximum versus distance into the field of view. 0 here is at the edge of the housing, and distance is measured into the field of view from the closest location to the scanning arc. So that's a circular arc, and just take a line tangential to that. That's our closest view. What you'll notice on that is that the closest, we're about at 6.2 millimeters full width half maximum, and as we get further out and closer to the center, things tend to level off about 8.1 millimeters over the expected heart area and 8.9 near the furthest extent of the imaging area. So in conclusion, in our initial evaluation of this unique spec system, we have excellent reconstructed spatial resolution, excellent tomographic uniformity. We have pretty good energy resolution for a camera that is a fairly standard design of sodium iodide crystals and photomultiplier tubes. And our future efforts will be further testing of the system. And for an example, here you can see the JSAC anthropomorphic phantom image with anterior and inferior defects. Thank you.
Other questions?
Did you say, would attenuation correction be worthwhile? Did you say if there's cardiac gating possible?
Cardiac gating is possible and done, and it can be done. That's not a problem. It does have that built in. And attenuation correction is not implemented at this time.
Yeah, another question there, Ashley?
You say sensitivity is comparable to standard LEHR. Now there's a well-known efficiency resolution trade-off.
Yes.
But on the other hand, you say there's quite a good spatial resolution. There's something missing. You don't have extra area. There must be some trick or some trade-off.
Well, the resolution comes from the pinhole collimation in the transaxial plane, and then long bore collimation separating transaxial planes. The reason that the sensitivity, my estimation, might be comparable to a LEHR collimator would be that that you've got the 5 slits imaging at one time. It's always hard, at least for me, to visualize the comparison between pinhole and parallel hole collimators in terms of sensitivity.
Well, this could be calculated. What about resolution in transaxial direction? Is that comparable?
The intrinsic resolution at the crystal? Is that what you're asking?
Transaxial.
Oh, in the perpendicular? Okay, I haven't measured that directly. From some phantom studies I've done, I think it's comparable to the resolution in the other direction.
Okay, let's thank the speaker again. This closes the session, and thanks.